The aggression and violence accompanying the pro-Hamas rallies in global capitals is not incidental. It's not the byproduct of a mob gone out of control. It is intrinsic to the ideology that they are marching in support of. I'm Warren Goldstein, the Chief Rabbi of South Africa, and this is why I say that. The rallies held in cities throughout the world tell a story. The pro-Israel rallies, like the one held in Paris with more than 100,000 people, and the one held in Washington with almost 300,000 people. These are rallies which are typified by being peaceful, prayerful, soulful, resolute, and most importantly, non-violent, non-threatening, not filled with hate. The pro-Hamas rallies held in general throughout the world have been typified by violence and aggression. Take a look at what has happened in London over the last few weeks, and very disturbingly in Melbourne, when a pro-Hamas rally held in the neighborhood of Caulfield spilled over and threatened the synagogue to the point where Australian law enforcement had to evacuate the synagogue during its Sabbath prayers. And in Cape Town, on this last Sunday, law enforcement informed the thousands of Christian supporters of Israel who were preparing to arrive at the Sea Point Promenade that they could not be protected from the counter rally organized by the pro-Hamas supporters. Thousands of Christians were preparing to come to Sea Point to pray for Israel, and yet they were stopped by the intimidation, the violence, and the threats. This dichotomy of two kinds of rallies is mirrored by the Gaza conflict itself. There is no doubt that if Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas would all lay down their weapons, there would be peace tomorrow with two states, an Israeli and Palestinian state, living side by side in peace and prosperity. And there is no doubt that if Israel, on the other hand, were to lay down its arms, there would be a second Holocaust. Imagine October 7 across the entire country. Millions of Jews would be murdered. And so it makes sense that the pro-Hamas rallies held throughout the world exhibit violence and aggression because they are marching in support of a violent ideology, jihadism, which is supported by Iran and its proxies. It is an ideology which uses violence and fear and terror as part of its very being. It is not incidental, it is intrinsic. It is not tactical, but ideological, to spread itself, to conquer the world. And so the jihadist campaign in Africa that we discussed last week is about spreading the ideals and the ideas and the values of jihadism through fear and through intimidation and through using violence as a tool to spread an ideology. It's the reason why the Hamas terrorists, when they crossed the border into Israel, took photographs of their barbarism, because that wasn't only about using violence to conquer territory, it is about using violence to instill fear and darkness in the world in order to spread its ideology. In fact, consider the word terrorism. Terrorism is about instilling fear. It is to terrorize people. It is a philosophy that says, let us use violence in order to intimidate people, in order to spread fear, in order to conquer the world. And on the other hand, the pro-Israel rallies are marching in the ideology and with the value system of Israel and its deep roots in Judaism, which has always taught the world through the Bible the importance of persuasion, of education. In fact, the Talmud says the most important mitzvah, the most important commandment that we have is that of teaching and learning Torah. Teaching, learning, persuasion, rational argument, respectful dialogue, respect for differences. These are the values that went from Judaism in the Bible to the Judeo-Christian values that form the bedrock of the United States Constitution and all Western democracies. And so these two different kinds of rallies throughout the world tell the story of two ideologies pitted against each other. One, an ideology of violence, aggression, fear, intimidation, terrorism. The other, an ideology of persuasion, of ideas, of teaching, of education, of respect, of human dignity. And that is reflected in the battle between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Israel, on the one hand, the only free democracy in the Middle East, and Gaza ruled by the dictatorship of Hamas, which is filled with violence, barbarism, and aggression and fear. And so what is the way forward? What is the right response for all of us? I believe we can take our guidance from the book of Joshua chapter 1. And I'd like to share with you, because this is what God says to Joshua as he was about to embark upon the great battles to conquer the land of Israel. Joshua chapter 1 verse 6, Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous. Because you are going to enable the people to inherit the land that I promised to their forefathers to give to them. So Joshua is instructed, Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous. And then in the next verse, verse 7, it says, Rak chazak ve'ematz mod. It repeats it and says, but be very strong and courageous, using the Hebrew word ma'od. But there it says something else, Lishmor lasot kechol haTorah asher tzivcha Moshe avdi, in order to do and to observe and to keep the precepts and the teachings of the Torah that I commanded through Moses, my servant. The book of Joshua is teaching us that there are two kinds of strength and courage. The one is physical bravery and the other is moral courage. In verse 6, it is talking about the physical bravery of conquering the land of Israel. Be strong and courageous because you're going to enable the people to conquer the land. But in verse 7, it says, but be very strong and courageous to preserve and to keep and to guard the precepts and the teachings of the Torah that I gave to Moses, my servant. In other words, that is moral courage, and we need both. We need the physical courage and the moral courage. Take note that on verse 7, when it talks about the moral courage, it uses the Hebrew word ma'od, very, as if to imply that moral courage is even more important than the physical bravery. And I think the reason is because from the moral courage comes the physical bravery. And we need both in this crisis. We need to have the moral clarity, the sense of moral courage to know the difference between good and evil, and to be able to understand that and to stand up for who we are and to stand up for our values. And then there is the physical bravery that is required side by side together with that. From here we have a clear message to free democracies across the world. Chazak ve'ematz. Be strong and courageous. Defend the rule of law. Use the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Use law enforcement. Do not overlook any infraction of the law. Pursue and prosecute every criminal act. Defend law-abiding, decent citizens. Stand up for what is right. Be strong and resolute in that. Have no tolerance for violence and intimidation. The weakness will only embolden and incentivize more violence. If you look back in the book of Joshua, it says that if you are strong and courageous, as tatzliach et darkecha, then your path, your way will be successful. The success will come because of the strength, the moral clarity, and the physical bravery. But then it says, fascinatingly, v'az taskil, the root of the word taskil is the Hebrew word seichel, which means intellect, understanding, clarity, meaning the ability to be wise, to truly understand what is going on. In other words, this requires insight. The moral clarity and the physical bravery will equip you to live with wisdom and insight and clarity, because it is so tempting for a free democracy to seek the path of least resistance, to seek just to make peace in the hope that the violence and the intimidation will go away. Like the British policeman who said to those who were coming to counter a pro-Hamas rally, and they came with a British flag, and he said, put it away, we don't want to incite violence. That is the wrong approach. We have to defend freedom and democracy. Have to be bold in that. That is the wise approach. The strength will bring the peace. The weakness will bring more violence and intimidation. This is a message for every free democracy in the world. It is a message for Jewish communities throughout the world. Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous. We have to hold our heads up high. We have to be proud of who we are, knowing what we stand for, having the strength of our convictions, the courage to be able to be publicly Jewish in everything that we do, to go to our synagogues, to our schools, to attend pro-Israel rallies, to state our positions publicly and proudly and with courage. for our South African Jewish community. Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous. And draw your strength and courage and know that there are so many who support us in this country. Since the talk that I gave last week, I've been inundated with messages of support on every platform from so many people across our country. We know that millions of South Africans support and love Israel and pray for Israel. We know that South Africa, despite the hostility of the South African government to Israel, South Africa as a nation has the lowest rates of anti-Semitic incidents of any society in the world, because the South African nation is a people that have embraced the motto of our country, unity and diversity, that have embraced the values and the vision of the founding fathers of the new South Africa, of non-racialism, of tolerance, of non-violence. And so we can be strong and courageous. There are many enemies who seek to intimidate and to instill fear in us and our fellow South Africans. Our answer must be chazak ve'ematz. We will be strong and courageous. Let me end with one final verse from the book of Joshua. It is remarkable that God says to Joshua for a third time, be strong and courageous. It says in verse 9, Halot tziviticha, God says to Joshua, have I not commanded you? Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous. Al tarotz v'al techat. Do not be afraid. Do not lose resolve. Ki imcha Hashem Elokecha, because the Lord your God is with you. B'chol asher telech, wherever you go.